Every year, lots of people move abroad, but most get stuck on one step, the residency visa, and we're here to make sure that doesn't happen to you.
Getting your residency visa does not have to be a big hassle, especially if you know where to start and what to expect.
In this video, you're going to learn about the most common visa types and how to avoid those mistakes that hold everyone else back.
Let's start by talking about citizenship versus full-time travel versus residency, because your personal goals might affect the type of visa you need.
And you might want to grab a pen and paper if you're the note-taking type, and we know a lot of you are, because we're going to cover a lot of information in this video.
If you're ready to leave the US, you have three options, and the first is to apply for citizenship.
This isn't an option for a lot of people because you have to have either a lot of money or an ancestry that you can trace. So if you want to buy a passport or citizenship, you're looking at hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars that you either have to invest in that country or donate to that country. That's really not an option, probably for most of you watching our video. It's not for us. The other option is citizenship by descent, and for that one you need to be able to trace your lineage through birth certificates, marriage licenses. Usually it has to be either a parent, a grandparent, or a great-grandparent. Most of the time it has to be within the last 100 years or so, and you got to be able to trace it. Again, that's not an option for very many people.
And not all countries will allow dual citizenship, and the Netherlands is one of those countries. So we would actually have to renounce, or you would have to renounce your U.S. citizenship to get that Netherlands passport.
That's another consideration if you want to go to the citizenship route.
Your second option is full-time travel or slow travel, and that is what we are doing right now.
This is a good option if you're flexible, meaning that you don't feel like you need to put down roots somewhere and have a home base. It's also a really good option if you're not quite sure where you want to move to and live full-time, because it gives you an opportunity to try out a bunch of different places for short stints, and you can really get a good feel for whether you want to live there long-term or not.
I highly recommend this option, even if you wanted slow travel within one country, so you really get to know exactly where you want to permanently establish roots.
The nice thing about full-time travel or slow travel is you travel on tourist visas, so there's no need to apply for residency, which does take time and cost money.
Slow travel does have some downsides, but that is a little too much for us to cover in this video, so let us know in the comments if you would like to see a video about slow travel logistics.
Your third option for moving abroad is to go the residency route, your temporary or permanent residency. That's what we're going to talk about in this video.
Most people will qualify somewhere, and it is more affordable than slow travel or than buying citizenship, because you can do a long-term lease, and then obviously you don't have to do $500,000 or more to buy that passport.
The slow travel option, the lodging is the most expensive part of it, and it's generally 2 to 3 times more expensive than a long-term lease in the same spot.
Getting your residency visa can often lead to permanent residency and possibly citizenship by naturalization, and you do not have to give up your citizenship to get residency.
Before we talk about the different types of visas, if you're serious about moving abroad, now is a good time to hit that subscribe button, because that's what we talk about on this channel.
All right, now we're going to talk about the different visa types, starting with the tourist visa.
There are lots of different types of tourist visas, including visa-free, which isn't really a tourist visa at all. Countries like Albania have that, where you just show up, they stamp your passport, and you're let in the country, and you don't even have to have a traditional tourist visa.
For other countries, you do have to apply ahead of time. We had to pre-apply for our visa for India, Vietnam, and Cambodia.
Then there's the electronic travel authorization. The UK just implemented this. You have to apply for that ahead of time and pay a fee. The Schengen zone is expected to implement their ETA sometime this year, although they have delayed that twice already, so we'll see.
Most tourist visas are valid for 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, but some are even longer. Some are 6-month visas like Costa Rica and Panama.
And some are 1 year, like for Americans, we can go to Albania and Georgia for 1 year visa-free.
If you're going to be traveling in the Schengen zone, you can travel there 90 out of every 180 days. And there are online calculators that can help you keep track of all of that, especially if you go in and out of the Schengen zone within that 90-day time frame. It can get a little bit complicated.
Yeah, and it's mostly European countries, but not all European countries are in the Schengen zone, and some non-European countries are in the Schengen zone. So you need to look up that ahead of time and make sure that you're following the correct country's rules.
In In some countries, you are allowed to do visa runs, and that means that you have to leave the country for a day, can be half a day, it may have to be a week, and then you could re-enter and it resets the clock on your tourist visa.
Is it really considered a visa run if you have to leave for 3 months or a year?
I
Probably
wouldn't
not.
consider that a
That's
visa
just
run.
leaving and coming back.
Yes.
At that point. There's no running involved. All right, now we're going to talk about the difference between temporary and permanent residency. We get this question a lot too. So generally you start out with temporary residency. It's usually valid for 1 or 2 years, although sometimes longer, and it can be renewed sometimes, not always. And there might be physical presence requirements to maintain the temporary visa or to apply for a renewal or to go to permanent residency later. Each country is different. Some countries don't have any requirement that you stay in the country for a certain period of time. Others are pretty strict and you can barely leave at all.
Our next visa is the permanent residency visa, and these visas typically do not expire, which is why they are called permanent, and that is what we have for Ecuador.
Yeah, we only have to show up in Ecuador 1 time every 2 years now to maintain our permanent residency, and that's valid for the rest of our life as long as we maintain that physical presence requirement of 1 day every 2 years.
Yes, and each country has its own type of physical presence requirements. Some of them will require you to only show up once in a while. Some of them are still going to require you to be there a month, 6 months, even longer. Every country is different.
Permanent residency is not the same as citizenship. You do not get a passport with that. That means you cannot relinquish your passport. So if you get residency, you have to keep your other passport. Otherwise, you'd be considered stateless, and then you wouldn't be able to travel anywhere. Probably wouldn't even be allowed to renounce anyways.
Now we're going to talk about the different types of residency visas, starting with the pensioner or retirement visa, which is very popular. This particular visa usually has age and income requirements, and most people use their pension or Social Security to qualify and meet those income requirements.
Yeah, sometimes an annuity will work. Usually it has to be guaranteed income for the rest of your life. The passive income, non-lucrative, or rentista visa, these are all kind of the same. Each country calls it something different. This just means that you earn passive income, usually from investments. Maybe you have a rental property back home and you collect the rent on that, or you have dividend, interest, or an annuity. You can qualify for this visa even if you're not retired.
The next is the investor or golden visa, and this can be a variety of investments, whether it is money or real estate. You might have to do a deposit into a CD like people can do in Ecuador, or buy property for a certain amount of money, or donate that money to the government.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's just what I want to do, is donate a big chunk of money to the government. The work visa is the next option, and this usually means that you have an offer or a job at a company in that country that will allow you to go there and work. Generally, they sponsor that visa type. It's not always easy to go get a work visa if you don't have a job, although it is possible in some countries, especially if you have a highly marketable skill set. The next is the digital nomad visa. This applies to people who work remotely for a company in their home country or in another country, or they're a freelancer, they work online, they have clients, they do various different tasks and get paid for that, usually also in their home country. It's not the same as working inside the country for clients and collecting your payments there.
If you want to bring your significant other, your spouse, or your family members, then most likely you will need to apply for a dependent visa. The dependent visa often comes with additional income requirements
and investment requirements if you're going the investor route.
There are a few other special types of visas, such as the professional visa that is available in Ecuador, the volunteer visa, medical visas. Malaysia is one country of many that offers a medical visa, and some countries just have one generic visa that they just call their long stay visa.
Now we're going to talk about some of the common visa requirements that you're going to encounter, and the first one is the income requirement. Almost every single type of visa has some form of income requirement. There was some confusion in our 15 popular countries video. A lot of the comments were like, why would I pay money to live in a country? And that's an awful lot of money just to live in the country. It's not a fee. It's just an income requirement used to qualify you for the visa. It's usually meant to cover the cost of living in that country. Sometimes it's only hundreds of dollars. Sometimes it's thousands of dollars. It really depends on how expensive it is to live in the country.
You may also encounter age requirements, especially for pension visas. Some of them start at 55 or 65. However, if you want to retire in Panama, you only have to be 18 years old.
Health insurance is another common requirement. It has to work inside the country. We get a lot of questions about Medicare. Do countries accept that? They do not, because Medicare doesn't work outside the US except for certain emergency situations. So you can't go to another country and use your Medicare to get routine health care there. So you're going to have to get a private plan in the country generally before you can go on their public plan. And almost every country has a public plan besides the United States that you can go on once you get your residency.
You'll need to check your passport expiration because most countries have a specific requirement of how much time you have left on your passport, whether it's 6 months or a year or the length of your visa. And you'll also want to make sure you have enough blank pages available in your passport.
Yeah, if you're well traveled, you don't have any pages left. 1 or 2 pages may not be enough. When we went to check into our flight for Vietnam, the ticket agent pulled out our passport and counted all the empty pages. And I'm kind of afraid to know what would have happened if we didn't have enough. I guess she wouldn't let us on the plane.
I don't think we would have been able to board. Most countries have a physical presence requirement. A lot of them expect you to stay in the country for 183 days because they want you to become a tax resident, but it really varies by country and the type of visa you get.
In terms of working, some visa types prevent you from working in the country. Even like on a tourist visa, a lot of times that's illegal, or a residency visa, if it's not the right type, you may not be able to work there, even if it's remotely for a company outside of the country. So you want to make sure if your plan is to go there and work online or at a local business, you got to make sure you get the right type of visa.
You will need to provide background checks and police reports, federal and state police reports.
And you're going to need your marriage license, birth certificates, divorce decrees, if those apply, because you're going to need to prove that you are who you say you are.
And all of these documents, or the majority of them, will need to be translated, notarized, and have the apostille applied.
There's way too much information to share here, and each country is a little bit different. That's why we created our visa matrix that's available as part of our free Move Abroad Toolkit. You can download that right now by clicking this link below or scanning this QR code right here, and it's completely free.
Now we're going to talk about navigating the application process. These are the general steps that you're going to take. They may vary a little bit in order, but the first thing you're going to want to think about doing is getting your fingerprints taken.
Yeah, you can usually do that at the post office or a local police station. You can just do a Google search for fingerprints taken near me, and that will usually give you some address markers that you can call. I would recommend calling ahead of time and making an appointment.
You'll need to order your state and federal background checks, but you want to make sure you don't order these too far in advance because in general, these documents need to be new-ish, meaning they need to be in a certain amount of time, usually 6 months or less from the time that they've been issued.
You're going to want to gather all of your visa-specific documents, like we mentioned earlier, marriage license, birth certificates, diplomas, divorce decrees, all of that stuff, your bank statements, income statements. There's all kinds of documentation that you're going to need to apply for the residency visa, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time gathering that, and we recommend starting that process before you leave because you might actually have to go someplace in person to get something. We had to do that for my visa with Ecuador. We actually had to go to my university and get specific documents from them showing that I graduated from there.
You may need to request an appointment up front with the government, so you want to go ahead and get that done before you actually complete and submit your application.
Well, some countries require you to go in person and do that, either at an embassy in your home country or at an immigration office in the destination country. Other countries allow you to submit all of the application, the paperwork online. Boy, it'd be nice to go to a country like that. Ecuador was not like that. We had to go in person.
And give yourself plenty of time. I know people read online that they got their visa done, or you can get a visa done in a month or 2 months, and that's great if that happens to you, but I always err on the side of caution. It may take longer, 3 to 6 months. Portugal's running about 2 years right now.
You have to complete your visa application form. A lot of times that's in a foreign language. Wherever you're moving to, it'll be in that language, and it can be a little complicated. You might actually have to employ the help of a translator to get that done.
After you've completed your visa application, you want to submit that and then wait for your appointment and wait some more.
Yeah, lots of waiting involved. You're going to have to embrace your tranquilo. You're going to be stressed out. Just be prepared for that.
The good news is eventually you will get your visa.
And that's a very happy day. We know a lot of people celebrate celebrate that day when they finally get their visa issued. Until that day comes, though, you need to pay attention to their specific laws about whether you can leave or enter, because if you're in the country and you have to apply in the country, you may not be able to leave during the application process, or if you're required to apply outside the country, you may not be able to enter on anything other than a tourist visa. If it's taking a year, like in Portugal, then you can only go there on the Schengen tourist visa for 90 days out of every 180 days. You can't move there until your visa is approved.
And finally, in some countries, you may have to go get your government ID card, and you may want to get a driver's license.
Some countries do not require that, like you don't have to get that in Ecuador. However, if you're a senior citizen, you can't get your discounts if you don't have your ID card. You also cannot go on their public health care system. It might be in your best interest to go get that ID card once you get your whole visa process finished and you have your visa. In terms of what the visa looks like, some countries have a physical visa where it's like a sticker they plaster into your passport. Other countries, it's digital, where it's just tied to your passport number. And it's important to note that when you get a new passport, your passport number changes, and obviously that sticker is in your old passport. So you're going to have to go through a transfer process once you get a new passport. That's why we recommend renewing your passport if it's going to expire during the visa period, even if the country does not require that amount of time. It's going to save you time and money to do that.
There are some common pitfalls to avoid, starting with incomplete or incorrect paperwork. This can happen because people are in a rush to fill out their application, they miss required documents, or they overlook the small details, and those small details can make a big difference.
You might forget to get something notarized or get an apostle, and that can take time to get, so you need to make sure you have all of that ready. Might have incorrect dates or mismatched information on the application, and they check all of this stuff. So you got to be really careful.
Your documents aren't recent. They have to be within a certain time frame, like 6 months or less. And you may need to order them again if they've expired before your application date. Applying too late is another common pitfall. Some countries can take weeks or months to process these visas.
Or years.
Yeah, or years. And people often underestimate how long they will be waiting.
Yeah, and then they sign a lease on a property or buy property that they can't live in. They enroll their children in school that the children can't attend.
You want to make sure you are providing adequate proof of financial means, because different visas require proof that you can support yourself, but the standards vary. The income requirement is not a fee, it is the amount you have to show to qualify for the visa, and it is the minimum amount.
Yeah, and sometimes you cannot combine income sources. So if you're applying with your spouse, some countries do not allow you to combine like your Social Security. Other countries do. Some countries allow you to combine multiple sources to meet that income requirement.
And some will let you do a lump sum. You have to understand those specifics.
And generally you prove this using income statements or bank statements showing a deposit. Some countries require a source of funds, meaning you can't just have money deposited into your account. You have to prove where that money's coming from. If you're going to Ecuador, you can just deposit money from one of your accounts into another one of your accounts. They don't verify source of funds there, and some countries don't. The next pitfall is ignoring the health and background check requirements. Some visas require medical exams or police clearances, and those can take time. You can't assume that a general doctor's note is going to be sufficient. You might actually have to see a specific type of physician and get a specific document signed and notarized. You might get background checks from the wrong jurisdiction depending on where you've lived. If you've lived in multiple states, you got to make sure and get the right one. Generally, it's the last one where you lived.
Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have felony convictions, this may be an issue for you, so you want to check on that immediately. Unfortunately, it can be difficult to find out until you actually start to go through the visa process. If you have a really old felony conviction from like 30 or 40 years ago, typically that's not going to be a big deal. If you have a misdemeanor, and they normally don't care too much about that, but you can never assume.
Another pitfall is not following the country-specific requirements. I think we've said a dozen times in this video that every country is a little bit different. So you might think that, Portugal does it one way, so Spain probably does it the same way since they're right next to each other, but they don't. They're completely different rules. You got to make sure that you're following the rules for the right country.
Yeah, and that can get a little bit convoluted and confusing if you're researching multiple countries at the same time. This is why you really need to slow down and go through everything very thoroughly.
And when you're doing your research online, you're going to find a lot of conflicting and contradictory information. Some of it's just plain wrong. It's been wrong from the beginning. understanding other stuff was valid 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and it's no longer valid. You really have to pay attention to the published date and try to get your information directly from the government website. That is usually the most current and recent information about the visas. Although sometimes the governments are horrible about keeping their website updated, and you might have to go talk to another type of professional like a visa agent or an immigration attorney to get the latest info. Sometimes their websites are more current than the government.
You also want to make sure you know where to apply. In some situations, you have to apply in the country. In some situations, you have to apply outside of the country, in your home country or an approved consulate.
Another pitfall is overstaying a previous visa, like a tourist visa. If you overstay a visa, this can cause you a lot of problems during your application process because you just can't generally pay your way out of it. Sometimes there is a fee if you overstay your tourist visa, and it kind of goes away after that, but they can hold a grudge and they might actually prevent you from applying or not approve your visa if you overstayed in the past, even if you paid the fine.
A lot of countries will allow you to apply for an extension to your tourist visa. So if that is applicable for you, go ahead and get that done because it will save you a lot of headaches.
And make sure you track your entry and exit dates very carefully. Create a calendar for that, especially if you're going in and out of the country multiple times, because they aren't necessarily going to report on that. And you could show up in the airport and realize that you're like a day or two off, that you're early, or you're leaving a day or two late based on when you first entered that country. So create a calendar and make sure that you have all of those dates written down.
The bottom line is you need to thoroughly research and understand all of the requirements for the specific country and be honest with yourself and with the application so that you do not have any surprises.
We highly recommend working with a visa agent or an immigration attorney throughout this process, especially because if there's a language barrier, you don't speak the language fluently, that can cause a lot of problems. Sometimes it really helps to have contacts in immigration. Our visa agent in Ecuador, she knew different people in the different offices, and depending on what we needed to get done, she would go to a different office because she knew it would work better with this specific person.
It is a lot of information to digest, but it is not as hard as it sounds. The key is to find a country that appeals to you and that has a visa that will fit for your personal circumstance.
Do you have any experience getting a residency visa? Please share that experience in the comments below, especially if you learned any lessons.
If you have questions about the visa requirements, then go ahead and download that free toolkit because the answer may already be in there.
You can do that by clicking this link right here and start taking some tangible steps right now.
If you're looking for the best places to visit or live or retire abroad, then check out these videos next.
All right, guys, that's all we have for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all in our next video.
Ciao.
Ciao.